what was actually going on with this baby formula. By the way, this is what's typically inside these baby formula. It's got some carbohydrates, fat, linoleic acid, it's got protein, it's got iron, and it's got other vitamins and minerals. These baby formulas were created to mimic the breast milk. Obviously, they can't do it anywhere near nature, but those are the ingredients, sort of the types that are in there: carbohydrates, fat, protein, iron, and other vitamins and minerals. We're not, again, going to do a cytosolve analysis of any of this today. We're going to go into the systems analysis, a market systems analysis. So that's the sort of the guts of what's in the baby formula at a high level. The baby formula first started disappearing from store shelves, some of you may know, due to what they claimed were supply chain issues, and also a massive recall took place from the largest supplier in the country of baby formula, which is Abbott Laboratories. When I first heard that Abbott was in the baby formula business, I was a little bit shocked, frankly, because I always knew them as a big pharma company. They make a ton of money selling pharmaceutical drugs, right? And other types of, and in fact, the COVID kits, okay? As I was watching this, what were these guys doing in the baby formula business? How much was it? Now, the baby formula requires regular purchases. And why is that? Because the shelf life, how long it lasts, is very low, and you have the frequency of use. So typically, a mother will spend about $18. Think about these numbers. You may want to write these down, every 3 to 5 days to keep their supply on hand. So you're looking in a month, people are spending about $80, right? 70 to 80 bucks in a month. So it's not a small amount of money if you're a working person. And that's just for the baby formula. If you are middle class, working class, what's interesting is because of the demands placed on mothers, right? It's not like they're living in some idyllic environment in a village like I visited in India, or your husband is the only person working and you can live on one individual's income. Mothers are working or they have stresses. So only 25% of infants are exclusively breastfed through the 6 months, meaning that most mothers need formula, and they were affected by this quote unquote shortage. Okay, so let me repeat that again. Only 25% of infants are breastfed, exclusively breastfed through the 6 months, which means the other 75%, because of the demands placed on working people, the child is not getting the nutrients from breast milk. Okay, so those are some important facts. Now, in the United States, 10 to 15% of the mothers have also low breast milk supply. Many of the infants, because they have specific food allergies that preclude them from most other feeding alternatives, right? So you have infants who have food allergies, and you have 15%. So again, another reason that people are driven to these formulas. Again, we're not talking about other real alternatives. We'll do that in another discussion. So what happened was, when these quote unquote shortage took place, some of the stores also imposed buying limits. But this didn't really solve the problem. It only managed the scarcity, which you're going to realize was really, in my view, fabricated by the inefficiency of a system which is based on the left and right colluding to create monopolistic vehicles so you protect Wall Street and a few companies. And this shortage is frankly fabricated, okay? And it really was an attack on working people. And in fact, you're going to see how these large corporations, a few of them, profited from these shortages, okay? Now, the crisis, as in many crises that occurred, whether it's whatever is created, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's the issues of a shortage or it's the issue of a banking regulation, ultimately really affects the small consumer, the small entrepreneur, the working person, right? That's who it affects. If you're super wealthy, you can handle regulations. You'll figure out some other way to get your milk, right? The wealthy always have a way, but typically this affects everyday working people. And what's interesting is Abbott Labs holds the exclusive supplier contracts with, we're going to talk about, we'll come back to this, called the Women's, Infants, and Children Supplemental Food Programs, also known as WIC, W-I-C, and everyone should research this. So the Women's, Infants, and Children Supplemental Food Program, which is supported by the government, which is to really be able to get these infant formulas to people, they have exclusive supplier contracts with 4 companies, one of them being Abbott, which means, to put it in a very simple way, the government has created exclusive supplier contracts with 4 or 5 major, large, mega companies. And so 50% of working people, poor people, rely on these WIC programs to get those infant formulas, which means you're essentially handing over monopolies to a few companies. And we're going to talk about how that was created by these quote unquote regulations orchestrated by the left and the right. So these WIC purchases make up half, which means the government supplemental food programs, half of all the formula sales nationwide. And the access to these infant formula is one of the primary benefits of the WIC program. And in fact, listen to this, almost 50% of all infants born in the United States rely on the service. So 50% of all infants born rely on the WIC program, and the WIC program has created virtual monopolies with 4 or 5 companies. So that's what's going on. And this has been done by both left and right. Very, very complex systems but that's what you have. So you have to ask, if the establishment is so smart, has so many intelligent people, how the hell can something like this occur? I mean, they should have redundancy. They should have ways to protect people. But remember that most of these are going to working people. So frankly, in system science, we say that these programs, these systems are brittle. They're not resilient. You may want to write those 2 words down. And in our systems course and foundations of systems, we talk about this. When you really understand systems, you understand resilient systems. And resilient systems, by the way, are decentralized systems. So you don't have just 4 producers of something. You have hundreds of thousands of producers of something, okay? Not just one. That's called decentralization. But those in power do not want decentralization of anything. They want centralization, because centralization leads to corruption. It leads to consolidation. It supports power, profit, and control. But if the system requirement was decentralization, we would never have had this problem. So the establishment for themselves, they create very, very resilient systems. But for the rest of the world, they create brittle systems. So they don't give a damn about whether these infants survive or not. They create these brittle systems, as I have. So now the claim is, if this is such an important industry that's so important for everyday working people to survive, and don't you think that they would make these systems totally non-brittle resilient? And furthermore, for many, many years, there's been lots and lots of safety issues with these formulas. They found high levels of dangerous levels of arsenic and lead and cadmium and mercury in many of these common baby food brands, okay, that are sold in these US stores, okay? So it's not like this problem has not existed in terms of the constitutive materials that make up these formulas. And by the way, the arsenic, the lead, the cadmium, and the mercury are things that lead to cancer, neurodevelopmental issues, kidney issues, all sorts of osteoporosis, immune system deficiencies, lung disease, and you wonder why our young people are having all these problems. But anyway, these have also been known. When we're talking about the quote unquote the recent crisis that took place, this actually occurred because in one of the Abbott labs, again, interesting enough, in Michigan, where the Flint, Michigan took place, they found there were actually 4 complaints received by the FDA of a Chronobacter, Chronobacter infection between September 2021 and January 2022. And in fact, 2 babies died from this infection. And now 4 infants had actually consumed the Abbott formula. So it was the Abbott lab, it was the Abbott factory which produced this, which had this bacterial infection. Now think about it. This is a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company which also is in the baby formula business. You would think they would make their factories, top-notch, Six Sigma, right, ISO 9001, all those very important certifications. They wouldn't even have this issue given the amount of investments that they would putting into it. And the FDA claims they'd already been working on some of the supply chain issues in the industry. They were aware of this. And when Abbott found out about this, or when they got involved in this, they did a quote unquote a voluntary recall, and they shut down its Michigan factory. Okay. So that was the events leading to the shortage, right? You have Abbott Labs, which is one of about the 4 or 5 big suppliers. They had a bacterial infection being reported. 2 babies died, and then that plant was shut down. And that led to this so-called shortage. All right. So one of the important things to understand is not long after there were some initial reports of these infections in these infants, a Abbott employee, actually became a former Abbott employee, had sent a whistleblowing document to the FDA and other agencies concerning that Michigan facility. And the employee was fired for his bringing this up. And there was a 34-page document which outlined the history of Abbott falsifying reports, bad cleaning practices, lack of traceability. So this was known out there, okay? The important thing is the FDA really neglected to recognize these issues and the food safety issues. And in fact, the fact that there were damaged equipment, right? And they sort of looked the other way. In this case, Abbott's really should have properly maintained these machines and the piping and the drying, and that exposed, because you're supposed to really dry all the equipment, that exposed the formula to these bacterial contamination.